They talk a lot of nostalgia about what Detroit was and how sad it is that it's become this burned out, decaying, abandoned shithole.
When I was coming out of college in the early 90s, I remember having discussions with my friends about where we were going to move to. There was nobody was thinking they were going to stay here and make a life here. It was a race to get out of the city.
These people, they come and take pictures and sell the pictures to people to see the devastation. That's bad. You know, I think that's bad because it hurts.
But I think that a lot of the young people, some of them even have an idea that they're coming to save the city.
If that vibrancy isn't brought into the neighborhoods, then the city is not a complete city.
Detroit's ruins hold memories while disfiguring them. The chilling emptiness of these industrial skeletons mock our desire for constancy, even as they evoke our melancholic tears. This Detroit is seen in permanent demise, crumbling homes and wild prairies, where transience is exploited by ignorance or hatred. And yet within this narrative there is a proud old Detroit whose neighborhoods remain. They have provided firm beachheads against the urban tsunami that drowns so much of the city's 139 square miles, offering bridges between past and present, transience and permanence. These neighborhoods provide homes to which one may return, where memories still take residence, where a sense of personal history rather than rumination provides direction. Beyond the ruins, there's another narrative. In a newer tale, the Motor City, fueled by corporate dollars, will reinvent its greatness and resurrect Detroit, glistening, techno-driven, and hip. Outside of this radius arises a compelling and inspiring tale that blends the old and new Detroit. This story is created by retro visionaries who are redefining and restructuring living space between transience and permanence. They are driven to reinterpret even as they remember, to awaken new connections, and to undermine deadening myths.
Most blacks that I have come in contact with would view some of the fascination with the ruins in Detroit with a certain amount of skepticism, if not outright derision. And the way that many people view the ruins, they don't view them as, quote, ruins. That is, structures that are devoid of a human history. They view them as places that they frequented, that they had living, breathing connections with. The train station is not just a huge cavernous edifice to them. The train station is the first place that their mother ever set foot upon this city when she arrived from Mississippi. So the train station represents something very different, you know, to people who have had experiences in that building or other buildings, you know. The neighborhood factory that may look like some exotic photo subject was the place where this father, you know, raised his family. You know, that's where he worked, you know, and there's a lot of grief associated with the destruction or decay or the desiccation of all of these buildings. There's a lot of grief. Chrysler Corporation was the largest employer largest employer in Detroit at one time. And at one time, it was estimated that they had over 60,000 employees. you know, just in this area. The Dodge main plant, which made, you know, Dodge cars, you know, so that's one major footprint in the city. Where there were over 10,000 people employed in that one facility. I mean, these are huge numbers of people. The Jefferson Avenue plant, Chrysler plant, had 7,000 people in it. And Ford Rouge originally had 100,000 people. 100,000 people laboring in that plant. I mean, if you multiply 100,000 people by the families that they had and affected, you're just talking about untold thousands of people. And it affects the community so deeply that over time, this trauma becomes woven into the fabric of the community. My father had a record shop on a main thoroughfare of Detroit that began downtown, that began in Black Bottom. The name of the street was Hastings Street, and my father had a record shop there that is now regarded as an iconic Detroit musical center because my father had a storefront record shop in which he recorded the sermons and the music of the Reverend C.L. Franklin, and through him, he was the first person to ever record the voice of Aretha Franklin. When Hastings Street was slated for demolition, my father had to abandon his record store that he had built up and was successful at. He had to remove that record shop along with the other business owners who were able to survive such a trauma on their businesses. And they were compelled to move to another area of town. Many of those businesses ended up in the 12th Street neighborhood, which is another thoroughfare of the city. And it is now understood that that migration of people out of Hastings Street area and Black Bottom is one of the greatest urban migrations that have ever taken place in this country. It was such a massive move of humanity from one area of the city to another. I remember my father, after Hastings Street had been razed, and when the Chrysler Freeway, which is a loop of I-75, was begun, I understood then that my father viewed that hole in the ground as a very significant wound. And here was this giant crevasse in the street, and it was a big earthen hole. And my father was telling me this used to be Hastings Street, and I understood his pain at having to move, his regard of this big hole in the ground as something that changed his life, as it being a wound. And it turns out that it was a wound not only to him as an individual, but the freeways in general cut these neighborhoods in Detroit apart. These freeways, as they developed in the 1940s, 50s, and 1950s, they began to cut a swath through various neighborhoods, particularly as the neighborhoods became majority African American. You also have the detritus of the riots in 1967. The destruction that took place was historically unprecedented here, I'm sure. And I believe that children probably growing up in this absorb the sense of decay and destruction and lack of care that comes with living amidst the detritus of all of this human failure, human failings. Yes, I think it has a lot to do with a lot of it. I'm sure it does something to the psyche to even experience the the significant structures of your life as being so decayed? What does that do to you to know that everything that has been in your life is now somehow virtually destroyed physically? That has to do something to your sense of permanence.
If you didn't cut your lawn, if you didn't repaint your house, if you didn't repair the sidewalk that cracks, nature would just break it right down, grow to its full potential. Things would be taken apart pretty quickly. And what we see in the city is buildings being taken apart by nature and how quickly that happens. Water, wind, erosion happens in all these beautiful ways. The work that I do in these sites, I want to integrate with this natural process. I want to highlight it. I want it to be something where your perspective, if you have maybe a stereotypical perspective, that maybe I can jog that a little bit, that maybe I can alter a viewpoint that you might have, that maybe makes you question what it is you think about a certain space. I think there are people who would look at photographs of Detroit, buildings that I photograph, places I work in, and their instant reaction would be, oh God, that's horrifying, that's ugly, that's sad, that's dangerous, that's scary, all of those things. And it's none of those things. When you're in those places, it's none of those things. You feel, if anything, it can be almost church-like. It can feel like, you know, the buildings can be so massive and phenomenal and awe-inspiring. And yeah, again, this word ruin comes up. The negative connotations of certain words. I work a lot where I build sculptures or structures on site, and I use the materials I find. I try and use the materials that are wasted in these buildings. And I try and build whatever I can with those materials. So I'm not taking anything in, I'm just using what I can. And a lot of times the objects I end up making are referencing what I consider to be archetypes, ancient ideas, ancient symbology, trying to basically connect our time with the past, because I feel like we're the same people through time, always trying to figure shit out. We might have different mythologies, we might be living in our own mythology right now, but we're still humans trying to figure out what we're doing here, why we're doing it, whatnot. As I said, I'm really interested in connecting our time with the past and the way ancient symbology and ancient, I guess, sculptures even, kind of, to me, connect us with the past. I feel like this word monument suddenly puts it up on a pedestal, where the word ruin, yeah, maybe it's literal. It's like smashing it down. So, and maybe I also don't really care. I question that word anyway, the same way I question the negativity connected with the word decay, that somehow all these things connect to maybe the idea of death or failure or our failures. And yeah, I do think that there has to be a time, there has to be some time for people to see things as more of a monument and more of a historical significance, as opposed to seeing it as our failures. Because in some cases, people are still alive who worked in a building that they're looking at now and seeing it decayed, or remembering the neighborhoods and seeing it as sad because they remember what it was like. And I think it's hard for a lot of people like that to let go of the past, to let go of what was, and just be okay with what is. So a huge part of what I do and what I want to do is be okay with what is, and be okay with the future, and be okay with transitions, whether it's a city or a person or a manifestation. So in my artwork, I often am making sculptures in places that I don't own, that I have no control over. The building could be boarded up or burned down or demolished or cleaned out by the EPA, like has happened. Graffiti artists could come in and spray something. They could knock something over. People have come in and manipulated or damaged what I'm working on, and it's definitely, in the end, completely out of my control. It's up to chance, and the elements will change things, and time will change things. And I love that. It's like I'm collaborating with all of these unknown collaborators and ghosts of the past, and to me that's a great way to work. It's trusting that everything's going to work out. And I love that transience. I love that ephemerality. I like that it ends up being basically photographs that, again, are like capturing some time, but that time's gone, and people will want to come and see what I'm working on. And I have to say, yeah, you won't be able to see anything. And I'm not going to take you to where I'm working on something new, because I like people to discover this stuff. I don't want them to know where that is. So yeah, there's a real interest for me in transition, in thresholds, transience, and that has to be part of the reason I'm still here. If Detroit didn't have this quality of turning, of churning, of moving in some direction, who cares what direction that is? I probably wouldn't be here.
You know, there's the story of the loss, and that's the photography of the ruins, and that's an aspect that can't be denied. It's there and it's real, and the people who live with those realities, it's a very real part of their lives. The opposite of the ruins and the story of the ruins is the boosterism, and that story says that, hey, Detroit's not so bad. Neither one of those stories really gets at the complexity of what life is like in Detroit or any other city. The Can't Forget the Motor City project is an attempt to really get at the complexity of life in the city. There's really no way that you can accurately or completely tell the story of the city, but I think there is a more satisfying way of telling that story. Well, my partner Roman photographs the people of the city in color. There are 750,000 people who live in the city, and a lot of the photography projects really deny the existence of these people. I think that if you leave that part of the story out, then you're not doing justice to those people. I photographed the surfaces and landscape in black and white, and so there are those two different approaches to how we photograph the city. The idea with the black and white, in addition to the color, is to create a rhythm, a visual, the visual interplay between those two. The mayors always talk about the city of Detroit coming back. It's not going to be the same city that it was 50, 60 years ago. A lot of those jobs that helped create the middle class, they're not here. And they're probably not going to come back. So Detroit's going to look like something different, and we don't know what it's going to look like. And there are good things happening downtown, but I think that an important part of the city's transition will be what happens in the neighborhoods. Having a vibrant downtown is a great thing, but if that vibrancy isn't brought into the neighborhoods, then the city is not a complete city.
Was raised in Corktown, in the shadow of Briggs Stadium. Lived in the neighborhood for 20 years. Went to school there and loved the neighborhood. It was so friendly that when the war came, World War II, and we were put on rations, the neighbors would share their ration stamps, because you got a lot of ration stamps if you had a lot of children. And everything was real good because the men were working, and they all worked for the auto factories. So then the war was over. I was older. I could walk to downtown Detroit. Detroit was great. Then I left 1950, and there was still a lot of people there. We still keep in touch with a lot of the people from our neighborhood. And our neighborhood, most of it is not there anymore. 2 years ago, when my grandson said he was going to take me on a surprise trip, and we went to Detroit. He wanted me to see what it was like now. It was very nice to see the new things, but it was heartbreaking to see the devastation, which, to me, was awful. And in fact, I said to my grandson, why don't they just tear these things down? Because buildings were, those homes were gorgeous. And they had been burned out, but just standing there. And very few homes that were being used. The hurt is there when you see the city, but you can see how it's coming back. And if you look at that, these people, they come and take pictures and sell the pictures to people to see the devastation. That's bad. I think that's bad because it hurts. And I know it hurts me. I'm sure it hurts other people. And I'm one that, in fact, I always have told my sons, when the Tigers play or the Lions, and they love them when they're winning, I always say, you're not a true fan if you knock them when they're losing. I love them when they're losing because they're trying their best. That's the way people should be about their city.
Biking around is where I really learned the streets and where everything was, and also what the landscape of the city. And then I just really fell in love with the buildings and the architecture and the old houses, and felt like I wanted to be part of that in a way where, when I was staying in an apartment, got this notice that there was this development plan for the area, and they were going to renovate this apartment building. I was like paying really small rent for, and it was this huge apartment. I'm like, that's when I realized, wait, I better invest in something, buy my own house, so that doesn't happen to me, so I don't get priced out. But I know also that I am a part of that because I come into this neighborhood, and I came in here and renovated this building that was boarded up and had some fire damage and all that, and was boarded up for quite a few years. And so in coming in and doing that, but then also I wanted to engage myself with the community that was here, not try to come in here and, you know, a lot of times we've had people come in from Europe, you know, architect students come in studying Detroit, because a lot of people are doing that. Yeah, they're trying to study it, and they're studying like, what can we do to a post-industrial city like Detroit to make it better? And to me, I mean, yes, okay, everything always can use improvement. Our own human selves can use improvement. That's what we strive for when we live. But I don't go around thinking that Detroit is bad. But this group came in from Vienna, and this was just last summer actually, and they wanted to come in and do a program, a whole study on the neighborhood, so that they could put together something that would attract developers to come in here and fix the place. And we actually sat down with them out in the gardens there and had a real conversation about that and what that means, and what our feelings about that is, and that we actually don't want developers to come in here, and that all that's going to do is push people out that can't afford to fight for their homes and their livelihood. And so we actually convinced them to take a different approach, to actually go around and think, how could they make things better with what we have without the need to bring in somebody new that's just going to dump without, millions of dollars in here and move people out and move new people in. So we talked about, what if you came in and you thought about how you could improve the people that are here, how you could improve their lives. Coming in here and fixing this place up and dealing with the struggles of people breaking in and stealing tools and things as we're going through this process of about 2 years working on the building. I opened it up as Detroit Contemporary and pretty much funded it on credit cards and just friends and family helping out. And there was, when we opened it, and I was warned. Everybody was saying, no, it's terrible, it's a bad idea. Galleries don't make any money anyways, but then you're gonna open it up in the ghetto where nobody's gonna come to it. It's off the beaten track. And there were over 500 people here for the opening.
We started our organization mostly in response to what's going on in the city right now. So we feel like we're at a prime point to kind of talk about development in a new way. The city of Detroit is kind of on the brink of either repeating the gentrification practices that other major cities have done, or coming up with a new way to be a little more inclusive to indigenous residents, but also supporting the influx of newcomers. So our organization starts by offering immersion experiences around justice issues that newcomers might not be privy to. So our first one in particular we did was on the topic of gentrification. So we had speakers that ran the full range from a real estate developer all the way to a woman whose family was displaced in the Paradise Valley neighborhood by the building of the freeway. So it kind of offers people, instead of that one narrative that you hear all the time about how good the development is, we went all the way from that end of it to someone who could explain kind of not only how the community breaks down, but how a family can break down and how individuals are broken down when your community's torn apart by quote-unquote new positive development. I think the biggest obstacle right now is a lack of information. So people here tend to buy into whatever the dominant narrative is, and the dominant narrative isn't always the accurate one, and it's not always the only one. But I think people sometimes are intellectually lazy. Nobody wants to challenge the status quo. So what happens is people just think what their friends think, what the admired official that they saw on television thinks, and it's really hard for people to engage in any sort of critical thinking around an issue. So our biggest challenge is getting people to think differently. Yes, there is a significant amount of tension between what is called Old Detroit and New Detroit, and I think a lot of it starts with misperceptions by each group about what the other might be holding on to. So newcomers kind of see Old Detroiters as trying to impede progress and angry. And then Old Detroiters kind of see New Detroiters as colonizers, is a term I've heard recently. So I guess the easiest way to put it is the Old Detroiters are viewed as obstructionists and New Detroiters are viewed as colonizers. And I think what needs to happen, and a lot of what we do, is to get people to think about the other group differently. So instead of being so defensive and going to those default perceptions you might have in your head about the other group, we're, like I said before, trying to get people to think critically about what might be going on. The newcomers need to acknowledge the pain and the suffering that old residents have been going through. And old residents need to acknowledge that there's room for new people. And I think once both sides come to some sort of understanding about where the other group is at, there might be a way that we can move forward in a way that everybody benefits. But what's happening now is it's an exciting place. There's stories out in the world about Detroit. Detroit is kind of a cool destination place now. So I think mostly what's changed is the story that's out there about Detroit, which also makes the current state of things different. So being in Detroit looks a lot different. There didn't used to be coffee shops and yoga studios in what is now Midtown. That neighborhood was called the Cass Corridor, and it used to be pimps, prostitutes, crack dealers, and now it's yoga studios and coffee shops. So there's a lot of change happening, and it's happening really rapidly. And it's good in a lot of ways, but there's still some room for improvement.